Hello and welcome, everyone. This discussion is a little something to get our philosophical muscles warmed up, especially for those of you in the Shrewsbury U3A philosophy group ahead of our meeting on Tuesday, the 12th of May. We're going to be tackling one of the all-time great puzzles, the mind-body problem.
It's a question that feels so huge and cosmic, but at the same time, it's about the most personal thing imaginable, isn't it? How do our thoughts connect to our bodies? We're going to dive into how three brilliant thinkers from the 17th century, René Descartes, Baruch Spinoza, and Nicolas Malebranche, each tried to crack this nut. Their answers are just fascinating and totally different from each other. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with something you do every day, something you never even think about. You get this idea, I'd love a cup of tea, right? It's just a thought, a feeling. It has no weight, no size, you can't point to it. And yet, what happens next? Your actual physical arm reaches out, your hand grabs a kettle, your legs start moving.
A completely non-physical event, that simple wanting, kicks off this whole chain reaction of physical events. And when you really stop and think about it, it is just bizarre. How on earth does the world of your inner thoughts make contact with the physical world? That right there is the mind-body problem.
Exactly. And if there's one person who really drew the battle lines for this problem as we know it today, it was René Descartes. Back in the 17th century, he was on this quest for absolute certainty. And in the process, he basically ended up splitting reality right down the middle.
That's so true. It feels like you can't even start a conversation about the mind today without first dealing with Descartes. He really did set the stage for everything that came after.
Oh, absolutely. His big idea is called substance dualism. For Descartes, the universe isn't made of just one kind of stuff. It's made of two completely different kinds. On one side, you've got the physical, material world, rocks, planets, and even our own bodies. He called that extended substance. But then, on the other side, you have the non-physical, immaterial world of the mind, the world of thoughts, feelings, consciousness. He called that thinking substance.
So he's not just saying they have different features. He's saying they are two completely separate realities, like oil and water. They just fundamentally don't mix.
Okay, so break that down a bit more for us. In his view, what really makes the mind and the body so different? Well, for Descartes, the mind is what he calls the thinking thing. The one thing it does, its entire essence is think. It doesn't take up any physical space. You can't measure a feeling or weigh an idea, can you? And it's totally private. Nobody can get inside your head and experience your thoughts directly. And he also said it was indivisible, right? You can't really have half a thought or a quarter of a feeling. Precisely. Now, the body is the complete opposite. It's the extended thing. Its whole deal is that it takes up space. It has a height, a width, a depth. It's public. A doctor can literally look at your brain. And it's obviously divisible. You can lose an arm or a leg. So for Descartes, these two descriptions are so radically different, they have to be talking about two separate things.
And the way he got there started with this famous quest for certainty. Descartes decided to doubt everything he possibly could. His senses could be tricking him, the physical world could be a dream. But then he realized there was one thing he simply couldn't doubt, the fact that he was doubting. The very act of thinking proved there had to be a thinker.
Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. It's that famous line. Even if an evil demon was tricking him about everything, the thinking itself was proof that his mind existed.
That's it exactly. And that's the key to his whole argument. He says, look, since I can be absolutely sure my mind exists, but at the same time I can doubt my body exists, then they must be two genuinely separate and distinct things.
Okay, I get the logic. It's a clever argument for sure, but it walks us right into a massive problem. And this brings me back to my cup of tea. If my mind is this non-physical ghost-like stuff, and my body is this physical, machine-like stuff, how in the world does my non-physical desire for tea make my very physical arm actually move? It's like, how does a ghost operate a machine?
And that is the million-dollar question for Descartes. It's famously called the interaction problem, and it's the biggest crack in his entire system. He did try to answer it. He suggested there's this tiny gland in the brain, the pineal gland, and that's where the soul sort of jiggles the body into action.
Right, which, let's be honest, sounds a bit weak. It doesn't actually solve the problem, does it? It just sort of shrinks it down to a tiny spot in the brain. You're still left with the question of how the non-physical can affect the physical. And this, right here, is why our other two philosophers jumped into the debate. Okay, so let's bring in our next thinker, Baruch Spinoza. Spinoza looked at Descartes' whole interaction problem and basically said, you've created a problem that doesn't exist. It only seems like a problem because you made a huge mistake right at the beginning, this idea that there are two separate substances.
So instead of trying to build a bridge between the two worlds, he just gets rid of one of them?
He dissolves the problem instead of solving it. That is a pretty radical move. Oh, it was incredibly radical. Spinoza is what we call a substance monist. Mono for one. He said, forget mental substance and physical substance, there's only one substance that makes up absolutely everything. And he gave this single, all-knowing, all-powerful substance a name: God or nature. For Spinoza, those two words meant the exact same thing. So wait, everything in the entire universe, a star, a thought, a rock, a feeling of happiness, it's all just different aspects of this one single thing? That's it. Everything is just a little ripple or a particular expression of this one infinite substance, God or nature. So what we call mind and what we call body aren't two different things trying to communicate. They're just two different ways of looking at the very same thing.
Two ways of looking at the same thing. Okay, what does that actually mean when I decide to make some tea?
This is where his idea of parallelism is so cool. He said mind and body are two attributes of the one reality. So think of it like this. Your decision to make tea is an event. That event can be described under the attribute of thought as a mental desire.
And at that exact same time, that exact same event can be described under the attribute of extension, the physical world, as a whole bunch of neurons firing in your brain.
You've got it. It's the same event, just described in two different languages, the language of the mind and the language of physics. They run in perfect parallel, like two clocks that were perfectly synchronized at the beginning of time. One doesn't cause the other, any more than reading a story in French causes the English translation to exist. They just correspond perfectly, and poof, the interaction problem disappears.
Now, our third philosopher, Nicholas Malebranche, he takes a completely different route. He was a devout Catholic priest, and he actually started by agreeing with Descartes. He thought, yep, Descartes is right. The mind and the body are two totally separate, different substances.
Okay, so he accepts the great divide that Descartes created. But then he's right back where Descartes was, stuck with that same impossible interaction problem. So how did he get out of it?
Well, his solution is one of the most creative in the history of philosophy. He also agreed that it was just plain impossible for two completely different substances to interact. A non-physical mind can't push around a physical body. So he said they don't, at all, ever. Instead, he brought in a constant, divine middleman.
Malebranche's theory is called occasionalism. His argument is that created things, so our minds, our bodies, everything, have no real power to cause anything on their own. Zero. So when I decide to lift my arm, my desire doesn't actually make my arm go up. My will is basically powerless. Instead, my desire is just the occasion for God, who is the one and only true cause of everything, to step in and move my arm for me.
Hold on a sec. So you're saying every single time I think about doing something, and then my body does it, it's not actually me doing it, but God directly intervening?
Every single time. Every thought, every movement, every sensation. You touch a hot stove. The stove doesn't cause the pain. The physical event of your hand touching the stove is just the occasion for God to then create the feeling of pain in your mind.
Wow. So it's like we're all just divine puppets and God is constantly pulling every single string all the time. My decision to raise my hand is basically just me sending a little request form up to the divine head office. That is a brilliant way to put it. And if you follow the steps here, you can see how it works in his system. First, you have the intention. You want to raise your hand. Second, that mental event provides the occasion. It's the cue for God to act. It's not random, Malebranche said. God set up laws for this. And third, God, as the one true cause, makes your physical hand rise. The mind and body always stay perfectly in sync, but only because God is maintaining that connection, moment by moment by moment.
Okay, wow. So we've got three really different views on the table. We have Descartes, who creates this deep division but then can't quite figure out how to bridge it. Then there's Spinoza, who just gets rid of the division altogether. And then Malebranche, who keeps the division but then builds this constant divine bridge. It would probably help to see them all laid out side by side to really nail down the differences. Absolutely. Putting them head to head is the best way to see what each philosopher is gaining and what they're giving up.
All right, so let's run through this comparison. First up, Descartes. He says there are two substances, mind and body. How do they relate? Well, they interact, somehow. And God's main role in this particular problem is to guarantee that his clear and distinct ideas are actually true. Right. Then Spinoza comes along and just throws that out. He says there's only one substance, which he calls God or nature. Mind and body aren't separate things, they're just parallel attributes of it. So God isn't some outside force, God is the whole system. And finally, Malebranche. He comes back around to Descartes and says, yes, there are two substances. But he says there is no interaction between them at all. Instead, God's role is massively expanded. God is the only true cause, constantly connecting our minds and bodies.
And when you look at that table, it's so clear that both Spinoza and Malebranche were really building their entire systems to fix what they saw as the big holes in Descartes' theory. I mean, these criticisms right here are basically the motivation for the whole debate.
That's exactly right. That interaction problem is the most famous one, the one we keep circling back to, but the others are just as powerful. That second point is a really deep one. Just because you can imagine your mind existing without your body, does that really prove it's possible in reality? A lot of philosophers would say no, not at all.
And that third point, that just feels so real, doesn't it? We don't feel like a ghost driving a machine. When I feel sad, it's not just a thought. I feel it in my body, a heaviness, a lump in my throat. When I stub my toe, it's not just a physical event. It has this awful mental quality to it. Our experience feels so unified, which is a huge problem for anyone who says mind and body are totally separate.
And really, that brings us to the main question we want to leave with all of you. We've laid out 3 powerful but totally competing ideas here, and there is no easy answer. So, as you think about it, which of these views actually seems the most convincing to you? And more importantly, why? Are you drawn to Descartes' idea? It feels intuitive, but it's got that big interaction problem. Or what about Spinoza's elegant, unified system? Or do you find something compelling in Malebranche's idea of occasionalism, which might seem strange to us, but it does preserve both a unique human soul and an all-powerful God? Try to think about the reasons behind your preference.
And here's one final thought to chew on. Philosophy is so often about trade-offs. Descartes gives us a special place for the human mind, but he loses a clear explanation for how it connects to the body. Spinoza fixes that connection, but maybe he loses things like free will or a personal God. Malebranche keeps both of those, but at the cost of turning us into puppets in a grand divine scheme.
Exactly. So what does each theory gain, and what does it lose? And maybe the most interesting question is, which price are you most willing to pay to get an answer? Thinking about that is the perfect launchpad for exploring this incredible question. Thanks so much for joining us.